She almost didn't stop. That was the thing nobody ever talked about afterward, how close Margot came to just walking past it. It was a Tuesday in November, the kind that bites. The wind off Lake Michigan had been cutting through downtown Chicago all morning, and Margot had already been on her feet for 4 hours. She worked the early shift at the Lakeview laundromat on Belmont, the one with the broken dryer on the left side that management kept promising to fix. She was 41 years old. She wore the same gray parka every single day because it was warm, and she didn't see the point in more than one coat. Her hands were rough from the detergent. She carried a canvas tote bag that said "Shop Local" on the side, and inside it was a bruised apple, half a pack of crackers, and her phone with the cracked screen she kept meaning to replace. She was cutting through Millennium Park on her way to the pharmacy to pick up her mother's blood pressure medication, the name-brand kind that wasn't covered anymore, the one that cost $64 when she saw it. A leather portfolio, dark burgundy, sitting right there on a bench near the cloud gate, face down in the slush. Margot stopped. She looked around. The park was nearly empty on a weekday morning in November, just a few tourists taking pictures despite the cold, a jogger disappearing around the bend. Whoever had been sitting on that bench was long gone. She picked it up. It was heavy. Good leather, the kind that doesn't crack in winter. A monogram on the lower right corner, SPH. She unzipped it. Not because she was going to take anything. She just needed a name, a number, something inside, a legal pad covered in handwriting, a set of keys on a Hermes fob, a business card for a law firm she didn't recognize, and a phone cracked screen worse than hers, showing 15 missed calls and a notification from something called Secure Vault. And tucked into the side pocket, a photograph, old, black and white, a woman holding a baby on the steps of what looked like a courthouse. Margot didn't know why that photograph made her chest hurt. It just did. She zipped the portfolio back up. She had $64 in her bank account. She had her mother's medication to pick up. She had a cracked phone and a canvas tote bag and 4 hours of laundry detergent still living under her fingernails. And she stood there in the cold and she thought, "This is not mine." The address on the business card was on Michigan Avenue, 22 blocks south. She didn't have bus fare. She'd used her last transit card swipe getting to work that morning. It was 31 degrees, and the wind was doing what Chicago wind does in November, which is make you feel like the city itself is trying to discourage you. Margot started walking. She told herself it would take maybe 40 minutes. It took 55 because she went the wrong way twice, and her boots had a slow leak in the left sole that she'd been ignoring since October, and by the time she turned onto Michigan Avenue, her left sock was soaked through, and her toes had gone from cold to numb to that specific kind of burning that means they're warming up wrong. She stopped in front of the building. It was one of those Chicago towers that doesn't announce itself. No giant logo on the front, no revolving door spectacle. Just clean glass and brushed steel and a doorman who looked at Margot's gray parka and canvas tote bag and made a decision before she'd even opened her mouth. "Can I help you?" he said. It wasn't a question. "I found something I think belongs to someone in this building." She held up the portfolio. SVH and a business card for "We don't accept lost and found items." He turned back to face forward. Conversation over, Margot stood there for a second. She could feel her wet sock. She could feel the $64 sitting in her bank account like a judgment. "There's a photograph inside," she said. "An old one, of a woman and a baby. I think it matters to whoever lost this." The doorman didn't even turn around. She almost left. She actually took 2 steps back toward the sidewalk. But then she thought about that photograph. The way it was tucked so carefully in the side pocket, not loose, not careless, tucked. And she turned around and she walked past the doorman and through the lobby door before he could stop her. Ma'am, you cannot just—" "I just need to leave this at the front desk," she said, still walking. "I'll be 30 seconds. The lobby was marble. Of course it was. Margot's wet boot squeaked on it with every step. The woman at the front desk looked up and her eyes did the same thing the doorman's had done. The quick assessment, the catalog of the gray parka, the canvas tote, the general impression of a woman who did not belong in this lobby. "I need to return this to whoever it belongs to," Margot said, setting the portfolio on the desk. "The monogram is SVH. There's a law firm card inside. I found it in Millennium Park, on a bench near the sculpture." "I can take that," the woman said. reaching for it in the way that meant, I am taking this to end this interaction. There's also a phone inside with a lot of missed calls. I'd appreciate if someone could reach the owner today, not whenever. The phone looked like it might be important. The woman smiled the smile of someone who has been trained to smile at people they're dismissing. I'll make sure it's handled. Margot looked at her. Okay, she said. Thank you. She walked back out past the doorman, who was on his radio. She walked back out into the cold. Her left sock was still wet. She still had $64. Her mother's medication was still waiting at the pharmacy. She had done what she came to do. She didn't expect anything back. She didn't leave her name. She didn't think about it for the rest of the day. Not really. She picked up the medication. She made her mother dinner. She watched the news and went to sleep with the sound of the L train outside her window the way she had every night for 15 years. She didn't think. I did something good today, she just thought. It wasn't mine to keep. The call came the next morning at 7:14 a.m. Margot was already up. She was always up by 6, old habit from her years on the early shift, and she was standing at her kitchen window watching the street below when her phone buzzed with a number she didn't recognize. Area code 312, downtown Chicago. She almost let it go to voicemail. Hello? Is this the woman who returned the portfolio yesterday? To the building on Michigan Avenue? The voice was measured, professional, the kind of voice that had learned not to show too much, too fast. Yes, Margot said, a pause. My name is Theodore. I work for Miss Hargrove. She would very much like to speak with you, if you're available. Margot looked at her kitchen, the dish rack with last night's plates, the calendar on the refrigerator with her mother's medication schedule written in red, the floor that needed mopping. Available for what exactly? Ms. Hargrove asked me to convey that the portfolio contained items of significant personal value. She'd like to thank you in person. She's prepared to send a car. A car. Margot almost laughed. Not meanly. Just at the distance between a car being sent and the wet boots she was still wearing because she hadn't gotten around to the hardware store for waterproof spray. I don't need a car, she said. But I can come by. What time? The name Sylvia Hargrove meant nothing to Margot. Later she would understand that this was part of why everything played out the way it did. If she had recognized the name, she might have been nervous. She might have overthought her clothes, her hair, the canvas tote bag. She might have performed something. Instead, she just showed up. Same gray parka, same boots, the left one still faintly damp. She'd swapped the canvas tote for a leather bag her sister had given her 3 Christmases ago, small concession to the occasion. Her hair was in the same low ponytail she wore every day. She was 41 years old and she looked exactly like what she was. A woman who worked a laundromat shift and took care of her mother and didn't own more than she needed. Theodore met her in the lobby. He was young, early 30s, with the slightly overwhelmed energy of someone whose job had not come with an adequate job description. He shook her hand and said, "Mems?" And Margot said, "Just Margot is fine," and he nodded like she'd answered a question he'd been worried about. He took her up in an elevator that didn't have floor buttons on the panel, just a key slot and a screen. Margot watched the numbers. They stopped at 47. The doors opened into a room that wasn't an office. It was, and Margot searched for the right word and settled on considered. Every piece of furniture had been chosen. The art on the walls wasn't decorative. It meant something. There were books that had actually been read, spines cracked and post-it notes flagging pages. There was a window that showed Chicago from 47 floors up and made the city look like a diagram of itself, everything laid out and logical and small. Sitting at a desk near the window was a woman. She was maybe 60, silver hair cut close, no jewelry except small gold earrings and a watch on her left wrist that was understated enough to be expensive. She was reading something on a tablet and she didn't look up immediately when Margot came in. Not dismissively, more like she was finishing the sentence she was on. Then she looked up. "You're Margot," she said. "Yes, ma'am." Sylvia Hargrove stood. She was tall, she crossed the room and she held out her hand, and when they shook, Margot noticed her grip, the grip of someone who had spent decades making sure her handshake communicated something specific. "Sit down," Sylvia said. "Please." They sat across from each other. Sylvia behind the desk, Margot in a chair that was more comfortable than it had any right to be. "The portfolio," Sylvia folded her hands. "You didn't take anything." It wasn't a question exactly, but it wasn't quite a statement either. "No," Margot said. There was a significant amount of cash in the inner pocket. The keys to my Lakeshore Drive property. A phone with access to documents that would be, she paused, valuable to certain people. I know, Margot said. I saw the phone notifications when I was looking for your name. Sylvia studied her. And you still brought it back. It wasn't mine. Something shifted in Sylvia's face, just slightly, a small loosening around the eyes that Margot couldn't fully read. The photograph, Sylvia said. The one in the side pocket? Yes, that's my mother. And me, 1967. Outside the federal courthouse in Cleveland. She said it simply, without performance. My mother argued her first case there that morning. She was one of 3 black women practicing federal law in Ohio at the time. She passed away in August. A pause. The portfolio was hers. I carry it because she didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Margot didn't say I'm sorry for your loss because it felt too small. She just sat with the information for a second the way you sit with something that deserves space. I'm glad it got back to you, she said. They talked for 40 minutes. Later, Margot wouldn't be able to explain exactly how it happened. How you go from returning a lost portfolio to sitting in a 47th floor office talking to Sylvia Hargrove about her mother, about the law, about a neighborhood on the south side that they had both, in completely different ways, grown up knowing. Sylvia asked questions like someone who had learned that the fastest way to understand a person was to let them talk. What did Margot do? How long had she been at the laundromat? Where was she from originally? Did she have family in Chicago? Margot answered honestly, without embarrassment. She'd stopped being embarrassed about her life somewhere around 35. Not because things had gotten easier, but because she'd gotten tired of apologizing for the shape of it. She told Sylvia about her mother's blood pressure, about the medication costs, about her sister in Memphis, and her nephew who was going to be applying to college next year. She talked about the laundromat not as a thing to be ashamed of, but as a place she knew well, the way you know a place when you've spent real time in it, when you understand its rhythms and its regulars, and the particular way the afternoon light comes through the east window in February. Sylvia listened in the way that powerful people sometimes listen when they're actually listening, completely, without performing patience, without waiting for their turn. At the end, she said, I want to do something for you. You don't have to. I know I don't have to. I want to. She said it cleanly, without drama. I also want to be clear that what I'd like to do is not a reward in the transactional sense. I'm not paying you for returning the portfolio. She searched for the word. Responding to having met you, Margot looked at her. My foundation funds adult education and re-entry programs on the South Side, Sylvia said. We also have a workforce development initiative that's been understaffed for 2 years because we can't find the right program coordinator. Someone who actually knows the communities we're trying to serve. Someone who doesn't need to be taught what the problems are. She paused. The salary is $62,000 a year. Full benefits. My foundation covers your mother's medication. We have a healthcare assistance program for employees' dependents. You'd need to do some training, but the core of the job is showing up and knowing people, and from what I can tell, you're quite good at both. The room was very quiet. Margot could hear the wind outside the window 47 floors up. She stopped, started again. Why? Because, Sylvia said, the kind of person who finds a phone full of valuable documents in the middle of a cold November morning and walks 22 blocks in bad weather to return it to a stranger, that person is rare. And the kind of work I'm trying to do requires rare people. She said it without sentimentality, like a fact. I'd want to know more about the position, Margot said finally. Of course. Sylvia reached across the desk and slid a folder toward her. Take it home. Think about it. Call Theodore when you're ready. Margot picked up the folder. She looked at it for a moment. Can I ask you something? Yes. The doorman yesterday, at the front desk. They were not going to let me through. Sylvia's face did something quiet and careful. I know. I reviewed the lobby footage. She paused. The doorman no longer works here. The woman at the front desk has been spoken to. It wasn't said with satisfaction. It was said the way you say a thing that needed to be said and isn't a source of pleasure. I wasn't looking for that, Margot said. I know you weren't. That's not why I did it. Margot took the L home. She sat with the folder in her lap the whole ride, not opening it, just holding it. The train smelled like it always smelled, like the city. like the accumulated breath of 1,000 different days, and outside the window the buildings moved past, and she could see into apartment windows and corner stores, and the backs of restaurants with their exhaust fans going, and a kid on a fire escape talking on his phone despite the cold. She thought about her mother, about what $62,000 would feel like after 16 years of early shifts, about what full benefits would feel like when you'd been scheduling your mother's medications around what was and wasn't covered. She thought about Sylvia's mother, a black woman in 1967 walking into a federal courthouse to argue a case in a world that had designed every feature of itself to make that impossible. She thought about the photograph, the way it had been tucked in the portfolio, not loose, tucked like something you carry because you need it close. She thought, I almost didn't stop. She thought, I'm glad I stopped. 3 weeks later, Margot started the job. Her first day, she showed up in the same gray parka because she didn't see the point in pretending she was a different person than she was. Theodore, who turned out to be Sylvia's executive coordinator, and also the kind of person who remembered how people took their coffee, had her badge waiting and her desk set up and a handwritten note from Sylvia that said simply, "The work starts today. Welcome." She put her canvas tote bag under her desk. Inside it, her lunch, her phone with the cracked screen she still hadn't replaced, and the folder Sylvia had given her, which she'd read 3 times over the course of the 3 weeks and had filled with her own notes in the margins. Questions and ideas and things she'd seen in her neighborhood that the program wasn't accounting for yet. She was 41 years old. She had rough hands and a gray parka and 15 years of knowing exactly what the South Side looked like from the ground level, from the inside, from the early shift at the laundromat where the broken dryer on the left side was still not fixed. She had not found a wallet full of cash and imagined a different life for herself. She had found it and done the only thing that made sense to her, and a different life had found her. There are people who will tell you the story of Margot and Sylvia as a story about luck, about being in the right place at the right time. Margot doesn't tell it that way. She tells it as a story about a photograph, about what it means to look at something that belongs to someone else, something precious, something irreplaceable, and feel the weight of it correctly. Not as a windfall, as a responsibility. She tells it as a story about boots with a slow leak in a cold November and 22 blocks you walk anyway because the alternative is something you'd have to carry for a lot longer than 22 blocks. She doesn't call it faith, though a lot of people who hear the story do. She doesn't call it karma or destiny or God's plan, though a lot of people hear it that way too, and she doesn't correct them, because maybe they're not wrong. She just calls it, "It wasn't mine." 4 words. That's all. She kept the portfolio photograph in her mind longer than she kept anything else. The woman on the courthouse steps, the baby in her arms, 1967, the whole impossible weight of a world being told what you couldn't do, and walking through the door anyway. The circle, she thought, had a shape she was only beginning to understand. If this story hits something in you, if you've ever stood at a crossroads in the cold and had to decide what kind of person you were going to be, leave a comment below. Tell me. Tell us, because that's what this community is built on. If you believe that what you do in the dark, when no one is watching, still matters, give this video a thumbs up. Let the algorithm know this kind of story deserves to be seen. And if you want more stories like Margot's, stories about ordinary people who turned out to be extraordinary in the exact right moment, subscribe to Velvet Reckoning. Hit the bell. We'll be here. Next time, a janitor in a Memphis courthouse, a briefcase left behind by a federal judge, and the truth that came out 3 years later. You're not going to want to miss it.